What's up, my good peoples? Welcome to the Be Transformed podcast, where we're talking about ideas that stimulate wholesome thinking into identity, purpose, vision, and action. I am James Anderson, and with me is Carolyn Anderson and Logan Eaton. My good peoples, what's happening?
Not much. Just glad to be on this morning for part 2.
Yeah, good to be back.
Good to be back. Yes, part 2, a series. Yeah. So this is part 2 of culture. So last week, part 1, we were talking about culture and you know how you're born into it and all the different inputs that go into kind of making up your culture. And then we kind of looked at that whole progression of then getting married and two cultures coming together and becoming one, and then having kids, and essentially then you're kind of taking that, well, you're still probably developing it, but you're taking that culture and kind of passing it on to your kids. And so, yeah, so as we kind of continue on with culture, today we want to look at like what are our core beliefs? Like as we look at the culture of Be Transformed, you know, because the question that I was asking was, what are the main ideas that cause us to do what we do? Like, why do we care so much about purpose? Why do we care so much about vision? Why do we care so much about, discipline and work ethic? And like, why do we care so much about ideas and the quality of the ideas that we hold? And what are those things that all just make up our mentality? It really comes back to our core beliefs. And it was just funny as we were just talking before we started, these core beliefs, it's just interesting to be able to define what they are, because I was already finding myself using them. And when I would, if I was trying to share specific ideas first, it was these ideas that we're about to get into, because these really are what shape everything we do. So, so we're going to get into what our core beliefs are. But before we do that, just a message from our sponsor. I'm just kidding. So before we do that, I just want to break down the definition of culture that we're working with. And the sponsor was buckwheat. Buckwheat pancakes.
The new wheat flour.
The new wheat flour. The original wheat flour, yeah. Gluten-free?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good, proper for every occasion. All right, so the definition of culture that we're working with is, culture is the beliefs, the mentality, the priorities, the activities, the habits, and traditions of a group of people. So culture is the culmination of the ingredients that determine what is normal and acceptable in a group of people. And so culture really, it sets the trajectory of your life. I was thinking about this as like, Chris Valentin gave the example one time of, if somebody goes to like an Ivy League college, like Harvard or Yale or something like that, and there's like this expectation of like greatness. There's this expectation that these people are going to go and do something impactful, right? They're going to get into politics or, something else. But you're going to get into something that has impact and influence. And I was just thinking, that's kind of the culture and the expectation of those places. And I was just thinking, sometimes different places have different cultures. There's a different expectation of what somebody would be, right? I mean, if you're coming from like a poor area, there might be a low expectation of like, hey, you're going to have a bunch of different kids with a bunch of different partners, get into drugs and, kind of continue on in a life of poverty. And that's because it's like that culture and those ideas are being passed down from person to person. Whereas like, a different culture might be like, all right, the people be disciplined, structured, and productive. But it's like, there's an expectation connected to certain cultures. which again kind of comes back to the fact that it's like the cultures really set the trajectory of your life. So people, you're looking at the results, the consistent results that are being created in a certain kind of environment, right? And then you associate certain expectations or lack thereof, or very small expectations over those specific cultures.
Yeah, which makes me think about, I read this story in a book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And he was telling the story about these tests, these school tests, and it didn't, they got the tests mixed up. And so the one teacher who thought she had the highly gifted students actually had the ones that performed low, and then vice versa.
So what was the test?
I don't know. It was an academic test that they, just a school, probably
Well, no, there was.
I don't remember what the test was.
So you're saying there was 2 tests?
No, all the students were given the same test, and some of them performed well, and some of them performed, they were on the lower end. And so the students were divided into the 2 groups, the lower performing students and the higher performing students, and they got it mixed up. So the one group of the one teacher who thought she had the high achieving students realized her methods weren't working, the students weren't learning, but she's like, oh, but these guys are really smart, so it must be something I'm doing wrong. And so, her expectation was that they should be doing well. So she needed to change how she was teaching it. She needed to change her approach because these, highly gifted students weren't getting what she was teaching. And, they realized it partway or towards the end, or I don't know, 6 months later or something. And they retested the students without telling anybody. And what they found was these students that had, performed low, actually they're jumped up. Like they had, they improved a lot. And then the students that had been highly gifted and were in the lower, had the expectation of them, achieving lower results, actually had decreased. And so just that reality that the teacher's expectation of their potential highly influenced their actual ability to achieve.
That's interesting. Huh.
But that's that culture of what the culture of expectation actually determines, because you could have somebody from a low income background. Miles Monroe, he talks about his growing up in a 1-room shack basically, and he became
brothers and sisters.
Yeah, with a big family. I don't remember how many brothers and sisters, but at least 8 or 10 of them total. So but he broke out of that expectation, and so it's just interesting.
Yes. Yeah, the expectation, or somebody's expectation over your life. As we always say, it's like somebody's expectation does not, or opinion, does not dictate your potential. Right. The whole idea is it doesn't matter where you came from. The only thing that matters is the ideas you get sold on. Those then shape your identity. It's not amount of money, place, time, circumstances that brought in your being. None of those things matter. They can if they rule your life. But if you get into these ideas that we're talking about and these things become who your life and you become transformed and conform to them, nothing else matters. From here then is the original idea of who you are in God's mind.
Yeah, and having that correct picture of yourself. Yeah. For those students, a teacher who actually believed in them maybe for the first time because was seeing them through a different lens. And so that's that kind of same thing. If you have the correct picture of yourself and your ability to achieve things and your potential.
Do you remember what habit that story was associated with of the 7 habits?
That's a great question.
I was just curious. Is it self-esteem or self-expectation or?
I'm actually I finished it and then I'm restarting it because I feel like there was so much in it that I want to read it again. But
interesting.
I'd have to look at it.
Yep, how you view yourself. Yeah, the 2 views, how you view God and how you view yourself affects everything else in life. And if those suck,
yeah,
then so goes your life. But yeah, But it's also interesting, the teacher, right? The teacher's expectation changed. Not because anything actually changed, but she had a piece of information that was technically actually inaccurate. She got sold on it, then became like situationally and self-aware that, hey, what I'm doing isn't working. We need to try something else. And it drastically changed everything. And one of those things, like you're talking about, Logan, it was self-esteem.
Yeah.
The teacher changed because of what the information the teacher had changed her outlook. Then she communicated that to the students, and then their outlook on themselves changed.
Yeah.
And therefore their production changed. The only thing that changed was the idea. And then it motivated because, wait, I can win. Right? I am actually special. I can actually learn. I can actually produce things of value. And then they started to, because your life is exactly what you think it should be, as they say.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, so again, culture is the culmination of the ingredients that determine what is normal and acceptable in a group of people. Yeah. For us, high self-esteem, that is normal. A low self-esteem is unacceptable. Would you say that's correct, Carolyn?
I would say that's something that I've been challenged on. I wouldn't say that it should be normal, but I do feel like, self-esteem and self-concept is something that I've had to work on, not to question myself or view myself from maybe a negative perspective. So yeah, that's something that James is always pushing me on, and just, being confident in my own abilities.
Totally.
And I see that now with our kids, and I don't want them, I want to give them a positive self-concept. And I can't pinpoint something that happened in my past that made me have that, but I recognize that it was something that I have struggled with, and I want to do what I can so that our kids don't have that same struggle.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's easy to get low self-esteem confused with like humility. That's what I've always struggled with too, where it's like you think you're being humble, but really you just have a poor perspective on who you are.
Yeah. Those are not the same things.
Right.
Because humility is really owning the value that you are and the knowledge that you have, but it's not like forcing it or belittling somebody else because of your greatness.
Yeah. Yeah, you almost need to have success to have humility. If you don't have any success, it's really, there's no real reason for humility. So you almost like need to have success and greatness to be able to practice humility.
Well, I think, that's because like success is based upon certain principles. And so it's like when you actually succeed, it's always a bit of a road to get there. So it's like that's like the reality. It's like, look, anybody could have this. It's just, are you willing to pay the price? But not only that, but then you also see all your shortcomings, right? You see, okay, well, yeah, I could have showed up more. I could have done this more. I could have prepared, whatever. There's always more you could have done. So it's like that kind of creates that sober mentality of it all.
Right.
But yeah, I think it was Chris Valentin, and the definition of humility was the ability to restrain your strength. It's not the absence of strength. As we say, there's no benefit to being weak.
Yeah.
There really isn't. I don't know too many benefits of being weak-minded, weak-willed, emotionally weak, physically weak, spiritually weak. I just don't know of anything where those things actually benefit you. So we don't put ourselves down. We don't seek to be weak because we don't want to offend. We were created to be strong. And so we have no problem setting an example. Not that we're perfect by any means, but like we don't mind. Go ahead and look at us.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's that picture. Like, if you actually want to demonstrate and be an example of like what God created and how He sees you living out your life, it's like you don't want to demonstrate weakness. Like, why would anybody want that? You want to be a picture that's like, oh, that's what it looks like to live in relationship with God and live a life worthy of the calling. Then, oh, I want that.
The biggest like example and representation of like the kingdom of heaven is a family, like a husband and a wife and kids, right? Who have identity, purpose, vision, and a life full of action. Miles talks about like, so the fact that the kingdom of heaven is a kingdom, right? A kingdom is a government. And in one of his books, he was talking about how the citizens in a kingdom reflect the character and the nature of the king. And the king is then represented in the people. So if a visitor comes to a kingdom and you come through the territory and the place is just a mess, right? I mean, it's like broke down, beat up. People are all mad, sitting on the street. The trash everywhere. No, fields aren't cultivated. People's houses aren't tidy. All those things speak then to the character and the nature of the king, because a kingdom is a king and the domain, right? So the territory in which a king owns and rules over. Well, if that territory is all beat down, broke down, low self-concept, right? No production, no organization, no structure. Well, that's a representation of the character and the nature of the king. Where if on the flip side, you come through the territory and the thing's tight and right? It's like organized, it's productive. There's people in the markets. People are selling, people are buying. All that stuff is economic, like growth and health. Fields are cultivated, streets are tidy, people are like walking around, people are laughing, joking, whatever, right? That then is a totally different picture of the nature and character of the king, right? So it's the people represent who the king is. And I think about that just in a family dynamic. It's like, yesterday we were modifying the bunk beds that we made for the kids. And so, we're making the bottom bunks, and man, I had 3 kids out there all working. I was like, me and Jacob, we were staining these bunk beds. Caitlin was over there. She was sanding all by herself. And it was like the sense of pride I had in like my kids who could take some instruction and then just get after it. And me and Jacob just, as he continues to develop his skills and abilities, I mean, we were just out there staining this stuff and making it look beautiful. And, and Logan, you and me, all of us actually, we used to all stain decks and stuff. And so it's just like, the attention to detail that's very necessary in that. And, there's just such a sense of pride when it's like, we're all working together, people are understanding what we're doing, and then they're able to just kind of do it on their own. It's like, it's that kind of culture, that kind of growth, that kind of development, right? It speaks to our core beliefs. It speaks to our core identity. It speaks to how we operate as a family. And so just like you guys are talking about, it's like, it doesn't paint a nice picture. People are like, well, what good is there in me? It's just funny, right? Because when you become born again and the very Spirit of God comes and lives inside of you, that's a really stupid, ignorant thing to say. There's nothing good inside of me, right? And people say it all. I don't know if they say it all the time, but there was some I don't know, Facebook thing some years ago I saw somebody did, and it was like, God uses broken people to do broken stuff. I don't know, to help other broken people. And I'm like, that is the dumbest Like, that's stupid. Because that's that humility that only speaks to low self-concept. And it's
there may be a song out there that says, I'm just a nobody trying to tell everybody
about somebody.
about Jesus.
Right.
But it's like, until you see that from the correct perspective, it's like that nobody perspective is like, I'm just being humble, that like, it's just like God using me. But it's like, no, you actually have value. You're actually created in the image of God. So you actually are somebody. Then to say you're nobody is an insult.
Yeah.
It really
is.
Yeah, for sure.
So having a real self-concept is important. And it's because, again, it's like it's like a, in that case, as God is the Father and we're the children, for my kids to have a low self-concept, I would never allow it. I don't allow it. There's a few things you want to piss me off. There's a few things you could do, and having a low self-concept, that will get me fired up right quick and in a hurry. I mean, you could probably talk to anybody I'm like that we've worked with or like are actually semi-close with. I think you could ask anybody if that statement right there was true. Because there's just like, I think if you want to create culture, you have to be that culture. This like all these things, like these things are us, and therefore they motivate everything we do. And it's like, yeah, I don't know. But having a low self-concept is unacceptable. And like you said, Carolyn, right? It's okay. We were made in the image of God. And so we're about to break into this. But it's like this idea holds massive value to who we are and how we act, because this shapes our identity. Most people, again, when your core beliefs begin with Jesus died on the cross, the problem with that is when it begins there is that you're in the middle of the story and then you're missing all the context that led up to Jesus coming. And when you misunderstand Jesus, the death and the resurrection, then you misunderstand who you are. And that's not God. That was never God's intent. So it's like sometimes I think we kind of misunderstand the sacrifice, get so sold on the death that we totally miss the whole point of the cross was life. And then people don't ever know how to live, because you're meant to live right here, right now, not someday, not when you die. What? I'm sorry, what? I mean, I'm 40. You want me to wait another 40 years and then life begins? You better freaking learn another story.
That's crazy. That's crazy talk.
Crazy talk. Yeah. So all right, so let's just bust into this, right? So what is it? What are our core beliefs? Why are we crazy? Why? What makes us us? And it all starts with Romans 12:2. Now, this is quite fascinating because I was thinking about this. I used to think about, maybe it was high school. I don't know. Even I think a little bit after that, I was more focused on Romans 12:1. And then I got moved to Romans 12:2. Let me just bust this out real quick. So Romans 12:1 was offer yourselves as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And it was interesting because I think if I would have went super religious, I think if that was our main verse, offer yourselves as living sacrifices, there's just for me, I think there would have been a massive, especially through the different crap that I went through, I think I would have went crazy religious over that verse. But I don't totally remember what happened. But it was like, at some point it was like, that's not the right verse. This one is. I'm not poo-pawing that verse or the reality of that verse, but for our core beliefs and what has made us was verse 2. And it says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you can test and approve what God's will is, his good, acceptable, and perfect will. So it says, do not be conformed to the pattern of the world. So the pattern of the world, again, we're talking about culture. You're talking about the beliefs, the mentality, the priorities, the activities, the habits, the traditions, right? He says, don't be conformed to like this culture that you weren't created to live in. He says, instead, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. He's like, then you can prove what the will of God is. So he says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Well, to be transformed means to become totally different. So he says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So become totally different by changing the way you think. Or as we say, change the way you think, change your life. But for reals. So to become totally different, you got to change the way you think. Well, it says, so be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Well, to renew means to bring back to the original, to make what is as it once was. This is very fascinating because this verse, and this is us, right? Be transformed. This is be transformed. This is where our name came from. And this is everything we embody. Right? So it's like we're always talking about the quality of the idea because the ideas that you hold, that you get sold on, they shape your beliefs and they shape your perspective, right? So it shapes the lens at which you view the world. So this is why we're always talking about this. This is why we care so much. We're talking about self-concept. Why the heck does that matter so much? Right? And we're not just talking about it as like a loose topic. It's like, no, for reals. If your self-concept affects everything you do, it affects every decision you make. It affects whether or not you're willing to step out, take some bold risk, or to step back, right? Would you dare to do something a little risky? Or is it, or not? Oh, it's too scary. It's too much at stake. Or do you like, I'm going to go pursue this. I could be wrong, but who cares? Your self-concept and your perspective is going to determine what you actually do in life. And we believe we were put on this earth at just the right time to manifest a piece of who God really is. And there's your unique expression inside of God, right? That's where that self-concept is tight and right and it's correct. It's like you display a piece of who God is in a way that nobody else can. Like it's so unique, so powerful, so special that there's a piece of God that only you can like
display.
There it is. That's the word right there. That only you can display the way that you can display it. That's that unique. That's the power and the value of you. Is that uniqueness. So be transformed by the renewing of your mind, right? So become totally different by changing the way you think. All right, so if you want to become different, you have to then get into different ideas. So he says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Well, to renew means to bring again. And so anytime you put RE in front of a word, it means to do it again or to bring it back to the original. So that means that you got to get back into the original intent, which is in Genesis 1, right? So when God created the world and he did it on purpose, in Genesis 1, it talks about what he did and why he did it, and then why he created mankind and what he gave us to do. This is the original intent. See, you don't understand this, you don't understand Jesus, because Jesus restored that which was lost, which was the original intent. That was connected to where you came from, your source, and then what you were put on this earth to do. So Jesus came to restore that. So you don't understand this, you don't understand Jesus. This is a big deal. So the original intent is in Genesis 1, 26 through 28. Right? So God, gets done making the world. And then God said, let's make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. This is where you came from. You know, people often talk about like human nature, and it's always connected to something negative. Well, you know, we're just lazy. Well, that's just human nature. Oh, we're just weak. That's just human nature. Human nature is whatever, something dumb. God said, this is actually quite fascinating because God's just talking to himself. But it's like, it's funny because he's like, hey, I got an idea. Says the idea, and then he takes action and turns the idea into reality, right? So he says, hey, let's make man in our image according to our likeness, and let's give them dominion over all the earth. And then it says, so God created man in his own image, and in the image of God he made him. And then he spoke to them and said, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, right? He's the idea he just had, he's then laying out to those he just created. So the original information, you know, as Miles talks about, he's like, the only one who could tell you the purpose of a created thing is the person who created it. And so, you know, it says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them, right? People get real confused these days about this topic right here, male and female. But that's because if you don't go to the source of where you came from, of where it all began, and you get your information from somewhere else, it can get jacked up. It can get skewed. It can get confused. You got to go back to the original. Where did it all start? Where it all came from? Male and female. He created them. All right, so it says God created man in his own image, and in the image of God he created him. Well, image is to look like, right? It's like a statue. It's like a replica, you know. And again, it's like parents and their kids, right? You look like your parents, and your kids look like you. It's not complicated. It speaks to where you came from, right? So it's like, okay, we were created in his image and in his likeness. The likeness is to act like. It's the nature and character. It's the essence of where you came from, which is God. This is where it all began. This is where you were created to be connected, right? You know, we got the whole talk, which we learned from Miles, about source. Prior to this, in Genesis 1, when God was creating everything, he said, hey, he would speak to the substance of where something was connected to, right? So he said, hey, let come forth from the ground, come the trees and vegetation. Well, where something came from speaks to where it finds its life, right? So a tree came from the earth. Well, if you go down, dig around, cut all the roots, and you disconnect it from the soil, the tree will die because you disconnected it from its source. You know, it says, let come forth from the waters the sea creatures. Well, if you take a fish out of water for too long, it dies because you disconnected it from its source. Well, when God created mankind, he said, hey, let's make them in our image and our likeness. We came from God, and therefore we're created to be connected to that reality. But in Genesis 2, you also see that we were also created from earth, right? He caused the whole earth to be watered, and then he formed Adam out of the ground, and then he blew into his nostrils the breath of life, which means divine inspiration. But it's like, all right, so we came from God and we came from earth. We came from God because that's where the source of life is. But then we also came from earth because this is where we're meant to work. So it's like, where you come from is where you find your sustenance, right? So, I mean, it's like animals come forth from the earth, the animals. Well, the animals eat things that come from the earth. Then when you die, turns back into dirt. Same with people. But people aren't just dirt. We're not just earth. We're first and foremost the spirit that then brings life to that earth. So then he says, then God blessed them. He said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And it's interesting. So he says, let man have dominion over the earth. What it doesn't say is let man have dominion over man. Like, you were never meant to be ruled over. Everybody was meant to lead. Right? Everybody was to take responsibility for an area of gifting and to work it and cultivate it. So he says, be fruitful and multiply, right? To be fruitful, I think sometimes in like a very general sense, it's the only thing that ever comes out of being fruitful and multiply is to make babies. But that's totally part of it. It's not the whole enchilada though. But you got to know Mexican food. So be fruitful means to be productive in your work, to produce things of value. To multiply means to expand, increase, grow, and develop. So it says, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Right? Well, to subdue means to bring into bondage and to bring under control. So he says, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Well, to fill the earth means to take the pattern of the Garden of Eden and then expand it over the whole face of the earth. So the garden did not cover the whole earth. God planted a piece of earth and then called that the Garden of Eden. Right? Adam and Eve eventually got booted out of the garden. Right? So all that just saying that there was a specific piece of earth where God began. But the mission of Adam and Eve were to be fruitful, multiply, produce things of value, be productive, expand, increase, to take this connected relationship with God. And there's a bigger word I'm looking for, but it's like all the full reality, the fullness of the reality of the Garden of Eden, which was like abundance, production, food, beauty, like cultivation, and that relationship with God. They were created to take that pattern and expand it and increase it until it covered the whole face of the earth. That was the job. There was a role. There was a mission, a purpose. Right? He says, have dominion over the whole earth. Dominion means to rule, to reign, to govern, and to manage. There was an expectation and a duty and a responsibility to be productive, to expand, to take this connected relationship with God and all these beautiful things that are in your mind that you create until the whole earth, is filled with the glory of God displayed in the reality of his people on earth.
No, I just really like I never thought of the be fruitful and multiply in that sense. So that's awesome.
So fast forward, right? Because we're saying this is the original intent. Then fast forward to Matthew 28, which is post-resurrection. Jesus says, all authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore go, right, in my authority, and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all the things that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the very end of the age. So if you look at this, he says, go into all the earth and make disciples of all the nations. What are we talking about? We're talking about, what does it mean to make a disciple?
It means to teach, train, influence, and recreate the good things that you're doing. And then they go teach, train, and recreate.
Oh, it's like culture.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it starts with one, and you build that's like if your kids, if you've taught them your culture, then they're going to go, create that again because that's their culture. So that's how you create influence.
Yes. Yeah. So a disciple, right? It's a learner. It's a student. Well, it's like, well, how do you teach, because he says, go and make disciples of all the nations. How do you get somebody on the path to become a student? It's where you actually teach them something you can actually use that either solves a problem or like benefits your life. Right. And for us, it's like, all right, I could sum up the kingdom of heaven with one word, and that word would be function. Function is the proper use of a created thing. So if you know why something exists, how to use it, and where to use it, you can use it on purpose and reap the benefits. On the flip side, if you don't know why something exists, you don't know how to use it, you don't know where to use it, then you're just left with guessing, and you can end up with a bunch of problems. Well, function is the proper use of a created thing. So it's like, all right, people don't understand relationships. They don't understand marriage. They don't understand sex, like why, where to use it, how to use it, when to use it, who to use it with. And when you don't understand that sex is meant to be in a relationship with a husband and a wife, if you don't understand that, you don't understand it's like because, sex makes babies. And it's like the environment that child is meant to grow up in is supposed to be an environment of function. It's meant to be an environment where two people have identity, high self-esteem, right? All these things that we're talking about. That's the original intent, right? That's the reason why we're not like animals where you have all that innate instinct. Instead, you've got that development process where you just absorb everything that's in your environment, right? From your emotional energy to just the conversations to everything. You're just absorbing all that, and that's beginning to shape who you are. But that was on purpose. That's by design. And so when people don't understand that, and you want to talk about making disciples, well, then you teach somebody what's an area in life where they're misunderstanding it and their results prove it. If you can show them how to solve that problem, they'll be like, what else you got? Right? Because the proof is in the pudding. Unless the pudding's disgusting, and then you're like, no, I don't want any more of that. Well, it's like, well, did you know if you don't believe in God, you're going to go to hell? Are you burning? Do you know where you're going to go when you die? Is that it? Is that all you got? Come get saved. Because then when you die, it'll all get better for you. I think that's what people think when they commit suicide. The reality of Jesus and this life is for this life right here, right now. And then it continues on after this life. But it does not begin simply when it's over. This is the only time right now that you have to work, to produce things of value, to have an impact. Once you're gone, man, if you didn't do anything, your chance for impact is gone. But those who understood that this life was important and what you do matters, and you're meant to have an impact, you're meant to have a lasting impact, then when you're gone, you can still be producing fruit. Like Miles. All right. So he says, go into all the earth and make disciples of all the nations. So not just disciples in nations, but like the disciples of nations. So again, this is the exact same thing he said in the Garden of Eden, right? When he said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, right? Have dominion. Well, the whole idea was to take the pattern of the garden and then cause the face of the earth to be conformed and transformed from nothing into this beautifully cultivated, functional environment. Well, that's what he's saying right here. He says, go into all the world and make disciples of all the nations. What are we talking about? We're talking about taking the pattern of the reality of the kingdom and then infusing it across the world from the top down of society. It's the same thing. We're meant to transform through influence this world, right? If you want to make disciples of nations, not just disciples in nations, but of nations, you gotta bring some decent function to the equation to be able to have influence on like a nation, right? A nation, like you actually have to participate in the things that make up the social construct of society. If you stand on the outside saying, hey, this is wrong, you guys are doing this wrong, you guys are all wrong, nobody gives two pickles. No, nobody care. Nobody's going to care. Your message will be useless. But if you're bringing function, right? If you're bringing a kingdom solution to a real world problem, that has a bit of an impact. You teach somebody, if you can teach a group of people a way to get sustainable when they were unsustainable, not sustainable. You know what I'm saying?
It's one of those.
It's one of those ways. People who couldn't really manage their own life and you teach them how to manage their life, there's results, right? That's like you're proving function. There are certain universal laws that it's like, no, this is how we were created to live. It's not, and you don't even have to say it weird. But it's like if you can go and you can infuse the kingdom reality. I mean, what it does is that's the thing that actually causes people to taste and see that God is actually good. Versus like, hey, turn or burn. Like nobody buying that crap. That's not even the point. It's not about the destination. It's about the reconnection to where you came from. That's the point. That's the thing that then creates transformation, is because then, we're getting into some new ideas of who we are. Then you actually start to take action based upon those ideas, and you start to be conformed and transformed by that reality. That's the point. It's not the destination, man. It's the transformation of a life right here, right now. And so anyways, the whole point is that the original intent is then reinforced and reinitiated in Matthew 28. So these things right here, right? These are the things that shape everything we do, because we believe that we were put on earth to do something of value, right? Once you're gone, your time is up. So after that then comes into Ephesians 2:10. So we believe we were put on this earth, right, to be connected with God and to produce things of value, to influence, to take our relationship with God, which has influenced us, which has opened our eyes, which has showed us, oh man, this is how we're supposed to act. This is how we're supposed to raise our kids. These are the things we're supposed to be disciplined. We're supposed to have work ethic, right? We're supposed to display like the true picture of the goodness and the greatness and the function of God, right? We believe we're put on this earth to do that. And so Ephesians 2:10 then really has some insight into that. So Ephesians says, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. So first it says that we're God's workmanship. So this goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning when we were talking about self-concept. We're his workmanship. Well, workmanship speaks to the quality and the skill of the builder. So if a builder was going to, I'm sitting at my desk right here. I made this desk. The one my wife's sitting at a desk. I made that one. But it's like when you think about workmanship, it speaks to the quality and the skill of the builder. See, which is why it's so backwards to have such a low self-concept, because the image of God that you're trying to proclaim, right? Because like you're talking about Logan, like it seems like it's It's humility, or we're somehow honoring God by dishonoring ourselves. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Because if we're his workmanship and we say we're terrible, or that's the whole, people are like, well, God uses broken people to help other broken people. I'm like, that's the dumbest idea in the world. No, what God does is take broken people, he makes them whole, and then in wholeness, people go and be like, I know where you've been. Let me take you to where I am. That's the kingdom. So we're his workmanship, right? If you think about like a masterpiece, I don't know, like the Mona Lisa, like art or something built. What makes something a masterpiece? Well, it's the reputation of the one who built it, made it with like skill. I mean, you think about like, Michelangelo or whatever. Well, people study his work, his brushstrokes and the colors and whatever. People study that stuff to understand who he was because they're like, that dude was a master. That's what we are. Masterpieces. Pieces that were made from the master. I mean, workmanship is a product or thing that was made, right? And it speaks to the degree of skill that it was made in. All right, so then it says, okay, we're his workmanship, right? So his craftsmanship, created in Christ Jesus. All right, Christ, when we're talking about Christ Jesus, we're talking about post-resurrection reality. So he's like, we're his workmanship, so that speaks to the skill of the build. Created in Christ Jesus speaks to the quality of the material you were made out of. This is important. The quality of the material is just as important as the quality of the build. Because you could build the nicest table, but if your wood was rotting, maybe on the outside it looked all right, but underneath you can't see it. If that junk's rotting, that table is not going to be sound, and it's not going to last. It's not going to be able to produce, a beneficial space to hold all your stuff, or your all your hamburger helper and spaghetti plates. Right? It'll all end up on the floor. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the quality of the build, and we're talking about the quality of the material.
Which makes me think of self-esteem. Because when you know who created you, then, that's the quality of the material. So when you have a picture of something different, you're viewing the material wrong.
Right.
You're viewing the makeup wrong.
Well, not only that, but you're insulting the craftsmanship and you're insulting the quality of the material. It's an insult. People think it's honoring. It's a straight up slap in the face. So we're his workmanship created in Christ Jesus. Okay, now this speaks to the purpose, right? For good works. Well, good is like beneficial. Did you have something, Logan?
No, I was waiting for that elaboration on the beneficial part.
Yeah, good works. Good, like useful, productive works.
Value.
Like, yes, to toil. So it says, which God prepared beforehand that you should walk in them. Now this part, they've all been good. Because, if you could understand, right? Because this goes back to like, okay, let's when God said, let's make man in our image and our likeness. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about the workmanship, but then we're talking about the restoration, right? This is bringing it back to the original intent, which is then created in Christ Jesus, in that resurrected reality where you're back connected to, right, the mind of Christ. You're reconnected to really what life was before the knowledge of good and evil, right? Where prior to the knowledge of good and evil, you didn't have to consider the quality of the idea because all the ideas were high quality. After the knowledge of good and evil, you had to qualify your ideas. You had to consider if it was a high quality or low quality idea. Well, this is bringing us back. All right, so we're in his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works. Okay, that speaks to the purpose. How you were created, what you were created out of, and why, for good works. And it was these good works that God prepared beforehand that you should walk in them. This is one of the most wonderful things that we talk about. all of the things are wonderful, but this is like, okay, but this then it goes is going to go back to your self-concept. Why is it significant that before God created you, he first decided what you would do? I'm going to open this up to the group.
Well, inside of you is the potential that God put there. And so that speaks to your purpose. And so if it was decided beforehand, then, it's already there. It's not, I don't know, just you do have to discover it, but that God did have a plan for you means that there actually is something in you that the world needs. Which, something that we talk about, that the uniqueness of who you are, the picture that you bring that other people can't bring.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe I think it goes back to like the dominion piece of it. Like if he stated that man would have dominion over the earth, then he needed to give man skills and abilities and functions and desires beforehand in order for the dominion piece that he said would happen, or that could happen, to occur and to take place. I guess kind of thinking like, yeah, like in order for that to take place, people needed to have something put inside them to inspire them and motivate them and, spur them on to do something good in the world. And maybe too, it was like God knowing that there would be a force in the world that would try to, cleverly prevent them from doing that. So like having that innate purpose inside of them would help guarantee the results then of people that would tap into that.
Totally. So another thing is like the thing that's most significant about this for me is, okay, so we're created for good works which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. When a manufacturer makes a product, there's first a reason, right? There's some kind of problem, or there's a situation where it's like, it's like, man, that's super inefficient. And it's like, and that problem or that inefficiency, or like, it's just like something's missing. There's like a space where somebody then spurs on an idea where it's like, hey, what if we created this thing and it solved that problem? What if we could add this and it can make us more efficient? What if we had this other thing? And people are like, I didn't even know we needed that. And you have it, and it's like it changes everything. So first and foremost, right, there's a reason. There's a purpose, right? We created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared in advance for us to get into. So step one, dude, when you're thinking about like the basics of the manufacturing process, there's first and foremost a purpose. There's some kind of problem or some kind of need or desire that creates a reason in the necessity for the creation of a product. All right, well, so then once you've identified whatever that problem was, let's just say, then you go into the design, right? You think about, what does this product need in order to succeed? Let's just pretend at some point somebody invented like the car jack, right? The thing that, like, if you had it enabled you to lift your car up off the ground. Well, cars are super heavy. And so you needed a simple way and an easy way to be able to lift your car up off the ground. So you got to think, okay, this is the thing I want to create. Well, now I got to start thinking about what this product needs to look like, what's it need to be made out of, right? Because it's actually got to succeed in the very thing that it was created for. So it's like your purpose determines your design. So we're talking about, if you're gonna lift up a car, it's probably not a great idea if it's made out of paper or like thin plastic. I mean, they do a lot with plastic these days, but it's like, no, they're made out of metal. They're made out of something that can withstand the amount of weight that it's actually got to hold and lift up. Not only has it got to hold weight, but you actually got to be able to move the jack higher so that it lifts the car up off the ground. You got to have the mechanisms to be able to do that. But purpose determines design. So it determines what you're made out of, the quality of the build, and the materials in which you're made out of. Once you have purpose, then you have design, then you have creation. The most significant thing that comes out of this order is that then you were created to succeed. when your work was determined beforehand, you know, because what happened is that God looked into eternity. He looked into time and space from the beginning, and he said, you know what that place is going to need? The specific time, specific place is going to need you. And then he pictured what you would do and the influence you would have and the value you would bring. And then because he thought about it beforehand, he knew exactly what to put inside of you. Everything God creates, he creates to succeed in why it was, in the purpose it was created for. And I tell you, there was a significant purpose for every person's creation. Again, the circumstances that may have brought about you coming into being aren't as significant as the purpose of your life that God had in his mind before you were created. This right here, this shapes that self-concept.
That's definitely a fuller picture of just of your potential, you know, and the why and what's inside of you and what you actually can get into because God put it there.
Agreed.
Yes. The other thing to note about this section, right, is of created in Christ Jesus for good works that you were prepared in advance to do. The other significant piece of this is, so one, you were created to succeed. All right, so then get out of this whole weak, broken garbage, because it's only in wholeness and in strength and in development that you're going to be able to do what you're created to do. All right, so you were created to succeed. You were created to manifest, to display a piece of who God is through this unique gift, right? This work that you were created this work that was created in advance for you to get into. That means there's something specific for you to get into, and that's right here, right now. It's not when you die. It's right now while you're alive. But the thing is that God gave you a gift, right? And that gift is in the form of potential, kind of like Carolyn was talking about. That gift is something that you got to discover, define, and refine. And you got to use it. Well, but that gift is in the form of potential. Potential is fascinating because it is not guaranteed to be cultivated. You're not guaranteed. It's not, to say it like this, God gave you that potential and he gave it to you on purpose. He is not responsible for the cultivation of that potential. That doesn't mean he's any way, shape, or form disconnected from that or you. But it's like there is a duty and a responsibility that we have to cultivate that potential. The challenge is it's not automatic. So one, it's like you need the right environment and you need the right ideas. And those are the things that help cultivate it. But then you need the right values and standards of life to then actually cultivate that stuff into a reality. But this is fascinating, right? So everything really comes back to the fact that we were put on this earth to do things of value, to create things of value, like with skill. And not only that, but those good works that we were all created to get into were prepared in advance. We were given that potential to be able to become everything we needed to become, to be able to create everything that we dream about. That stuff that when you truly dream like the dreams of God, the thing that was like you were born to do, is a wonderful dream. It's wonderful because you were created. It's like it's a part of who you are. But the biggest point is that you got to cultivate it into a reality. So these core beliefs, and these are our core beliefs, this is everything we do flows from these truths and these realities. When we think about like, hey, what are our non-negotiables? Well, one of those things was, we read books about like growth. Well, that's because we know that the gift that we've been given is in the form of potential, and we have got to keep learning and growing and becoming and using to be able to equip ourselves to do the very work that we were created to do. It's part of our culture because it's part of our core beliefs. And so what's fascinating is being able to define these things then really brings in more power and more oomph. Knowing where our core beliefs are, it brings just a little more power behind why do we do what we do? Like, why do we care so much about the things we care about? Because when you know the reason behind it, it brings a whole lot more meaning. And Carolyn, you were talking about this last podcast, it's just talking about cultures, how we grew up, it's like, okay, you got to have your quiet time. You got to read these books. You got to listen to these messages. But it's like, the problem is that when you don't have the reason why and the perspective's a bit off, it loses its meaning. That's like traditions too. It's like traditions are meant to remind you of your core beliefs, but sometimes you can get, as you go from generation to generation, the generation where it began, it has a lot of meaning. You think about like God was creating culture, right? With Abraham. He was like, hey, I'm going to turn you into a great nation. Okay, so he was going from one man to a whole, and he was going to create a whole nation unto himself, right? So when they came out of Egypt, they were going to become Israel, right? The 12, which Israel was like the 12 sons of Jacob, who became Israel. And then as the generations go on, right, they were in Egypt, and they move out of Egypt, and they get the law. And the law, it's like, to become a nation, you got to have, one, you got to have territory. And they were going to the promised land. And two, you got to have laws. You've got to have some kind of like societal structure. And that is exactly what God was doing. And so you think about like, okay, they some traditions, right, was the Passover, right? Which was that the whole Passover was like you have a lamb, and you put the blood over your door, and then the destroyer angel skipped the houses that had the blood over it, and then they went all into Egypt and killed all the firstborns. But the Passover, and you're making unleavened bread, right? Because they were like, hey, you got to make unleavened bread. You don't got time for that yeast to rise. You just need to make some food and get on the journey. But it's like those traditions came because of these specific instances. But as those traditions get passed down from generation to generation, sometimes they can lose the reason behind it. And when you lose the reason behind it, it's the whole point kind of is missed. So having the point is super necessary. And so being able to define these things is wonderful. So those are the core beliefs that really we get into. So in part 3, what a series. We're going to get into we're just going to touch a little bit on what it actually looks like to create culture, right? So you got your core beliefs, but then what are the values and the standards that then cause you to live out those core beliefs? So my good peoples, thanks for kicking it with us. Until next time, peace.